Hey everyone, it's Presley at ActOutGames.com here, and today we are going to be starting our new series on homeschool theory.
Yeah, sounds good. Cool. Okay, so we continue to get a lot of questions about our homeschooling and about how we homeschool Presley.
So is this kind of just going to be a giant homeschool Q&A?
So it can be, certainly. So if people have questions, specific questions about homeschooling,
then please post them in the comments and we will probably answer them in the next one.
Yeah, no, happy to do that. Happy to do that.
We're happy to answer any questions about homeschooling. Like, probably our most common one we have right now is, do you have friends? Obviously, I have friends. I go on play dates. I talk to my friends on Skype almost every day.
Right.
Like,
well, you go meet your friends almost every day. Yeah. People come over, you go over there. We do co-op, so we like work together to do cool stuff.
I Skype with at least one friend every day. Yeah. If not, I'm going to be really lonely that day, unless I'm like going over to a camp. If I don't
you go to the zoo, you go to the botanical garden.
Yeah.
You go to
I do have friends.
Orchestra. Yeah.
I can't name the last day that I didn't at least talk once to my friend.
Yeah, and so we've definitely learned this socialization. We'll do a whole thing on socialization. This is not the socialization thing. We'll do one on socialization.
Yeah, we'll do one.
It's not. We do get that asked.
Short answer: yes, I do have friends.
Although it is interesting that when you talk about homeschooling, more people ask about socialization than ask about education, right? Yeah. So people sort of assume that education's covered, which is interesting. They think you get a better education homeschooling than you do in public schools, or at least they don't ask about it. Yeah. They ask a lot more about your socialization.
Well, yeah, I guess that's kind of true because I get to learn at my own pace.
Look, there's no doubt. So we're going to talk about all that, right? So what I want to do, though, is so that you and I don't do another half-hour vlog like we always do whenever it's just you and me talking. We're going to keep it tight, all right? So we're going to talk about one thing and one very specific thing this time, which is like memory and forgetting is kind of what we're going to talk about.
Memory and forgetting.
Memory and forgetting. And a little bit of like learning styles and stuff. Oh, you were? Yeah. Which one? Oh, the one. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, you're right. We were watching Penn and Teller's Full S. Yes. And they were doing a trick that involved memory, right?
And so, just like, nobody, nope.
Right.
It says a nail gun.
Presley's Japanese, like learning vocabulary, and learning anything, really. But so things you have to memorize especially, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that and what cognitive science is saying about how this works.
Like, this whole thing, I've heard about, I don't remember if we talked about this or if I saw it on the internet somewhere. Okay. But memorization is not just read this thing 50 billion times. Like, read the textbook. Read the textbook. Read it more, read it more, read it more. Do your homework from what you know from the textbook, which you read 5 billion times. It's a whole different thing, and cognitive science, that's kind of hard for me to say, proves there's different ways to learn and memorize faster. Yeah,
there's better ways.
There's better ways to learn than just read textbook. And
so we'll talk about let's say we're going to talk about like two techniques.
Yes.
Two important techniques in part of learning.
For like memorizing.
For memorizing, learning facts, right? And learning, like when we just started the crash course anatomy and physiology course. And so I'm going to make you like this, and we're going to use this system for you to learn like the body positioning things that he talked about in that first video, right? So when you need to learn these things, like I do believe sort of in Bloom's taxonomy, which is a whole other thing that we can talk about, but it's like you learn the facts and then you learn to apply them. And then like in your bubble video the other day, you were talking about how I take what I learned over here about cohesion and adhesion and I apply it over here. Yes. Right? That's a higher level of learning, right?
I've done that with
No, you're really good. You're really good at that, and that's an important part of learning, right? But first, you have to learn that thing. You have to learn about cohesion and adhesion before you can really successfully apply them somewhere else, right? So this is more about how do you learn about cohesion and adhesion, right?
And less than, okay, now that I know about these things, how do I apply it to a different thing? It's simple. At least it's simple for me. So you get a problem. You don't know the answer to it. You look at it, you just try and figure it out without knowing anything. Yeah. And that's basically...
what do I know that might apply to this situation, right? And the what do I know, you need to build up a big repository of what do I know. You got a pretty big repository of what do I know. But you got to build up a big repository of what do I knows so that you can start applying it to different situations. Like this thing's moving, so there's probably inertia, there's probably friction, there's wind blowing around, so Bernoulli's principle may be applied. Like you're thinking about all of those things.
I literally did this same thing. I was at Lowe's and I was wondering why won't the cart go fast? Yeah. So I started being like, okay, so maybe it's so big, but force equals mass times acceleration. So maybe if I put a lot more like force on it, then I'll get more acceleration with it.
That's right.
And
Newton's laws.
Yeah,
Always
Newton's laws.
Yeah.
Newton's laws have apply to pretty much everything.
They apply to a lot of things, right? So, so to talk about these two different techniques, what we're going to talk about really is spaced repetition, SRS, and assessment as a part of learning.
My Japanese flashcard. You press spaced repetition.
What? I'm sorry?
That was an option in my Japanese flashcard. Spaced repetition.
So the flashcards we use spaced repetition. That's what we do. So Memrise, which is the app we're using now. Anki is a really famous version of that. Flashcards Deluxe is a really famous version.
Flashcards Deluxe.
Flashcards Plus Plus, I think, is another one.
We have flashcards.
A lot of the flashcards apps that you can get. Right now, I'm really loving Memrise. I think it's a great implementation of it, and we use it on my Android and on your iPhone, and we can kind of share things. It's really cool. iPod. Yeah, your iOS device.
Yes.
So what spaced repetition is, this is all about memory and forgetting. And the idea is that it doesn't do you any good to like reread a word. Like if you're looking at a word and you want to learn this Japanese word, you want to learn that ginki means well or good, right? It doesn't do you a lot of good to just keep looking at ginki over and over again, right?
Okay.
Like reading it 50 times isn't hugely valuable because it's just in your short-term memory and it's just cached there.
Yeah,
and you're not reinforcing it, right?
It's in your short-term memory and it's also kind of boring. It's like, okay.
Yeah, right. So what you have to do is you have to recall it. Like the exercise of recalling or remembering something makes the connections in your brain stronger to that thing. It makes it easier to remember it. Every time you remember it, it gets easier to remember it, right? But in order to remember something, you kind of have to have forgotten it a little bit, right? So that's the trick. That's what spaced repetition means.
Okay, I didn't know that, so I felt really, really bad about forgetting something like that.
No, it's really good as long as you remember it again, right? And you should struggle a little bit. It's called desirable difficulty. Like it should be a little bit hard to remember it, right? You should have to think. And so what spaced repetition does is it says, okay, the first time you look at ginki and say ginki means well, then you're probably only going to remember that for about a day. And so I'm going to show it to you again tomorrow. Like you have the flashcard app that controls how often these words come back up to you. And so it's going to show it again the next day. And you may have forgotten it. And if you've forgotten it, it says, okay, you haven't memorized this, so I'm going to show it to you again in 4 hours. And, oh, you got it. Okay, now I'm going to show it to you again in a day. And if you remember it 2 days in a row, then there's this forgetting curve that you can kind of map out. And it's a little bit different for every person. For every people. It's a little different for every people. It's a little different for everybody. And what the good versions of these apps do is they learn what your forgetting curve is, like how long it takes you to forget a word, and then it asks you, it quizzes you on that word right before you're about to forget it, before it's completely going to leave your mind, and you're going to have to look it up. You're going to miss the answer. And so it starts spacing it out, and as you get the answer right more and more, that spaces get longer and longer. Yeah, and so you're studying a deck of like 500 Japanese vocabulary words, like this word that you got right, that's really easy for you, like E, right? It means good. You know, or ginki, even, you know, ginki. So ginki, you know ginki, you get it right, you know, it shows you the next day, and then it waits a week and it shows you, and then it waits a month and it shows you, and you just keep getting it right. It just keeps spacing that out, but it never stops showing it to you. It just says, okay, now it's 6 months. Every 6 months I'm going to show it to you just to make sure you still remember it. And if you miss it, it goes back through that cycle again, right? And so...
Which is really, really... sometimes that's annoying because I misclick a button. Like I clicked the wrong button, I'm just like, I started it over.
Like again, no, it doesn't totally reset. The good apps like know that you could make a mistake, and so they quiz you again a couple of times and say, oh yeah, you really got it, right? It just depends on the quality of the application, right? The algorithm that they're running.
I was probably using a worse app, and I'm just like, no, oops, I accidentally clicked it. Oh no,
it'll ask you again several times just to make sure you really know it, but then it'll put that back in the cadence that it's supposed to be, right? So that has been shown to be like the most efficient way to memorize these things. Like you can study it more, and actually what they've shown in a lot of the research that's out there right now is that studying it more frequently slows you down. Like you learn it faster studying it less. This whole desirable difficulty thing, like having to struggle to remember it is a key to learning it. And if you study it every day, then you never give yourself that opportunity to forget it a little bit and have to recall it and have to pull it back. And that causes you to learn more slowly, which is really fascinating. Doing less is more a lot in some cognitive science, right? Like, doing it efficiently and intelligently, right?
Okay, I'm sorry if I'm completely wrong because I know nothing about public school.
Okay,
but
that's why you're part of this. I mean, it's important to me that you know why we're doing things the way that we're doing them too. Why we use those apps on the phone and why we do those things. So I think it's important. So
I know nothing about public school.
If you have a question, let's go.
But I think that's a little bit why I move faster than I would in public school.
It's part of it.
Public school, I think, I'm so sorry. They make you look at the problem and memorize the fact.
They do, they do a lot more.
Look at this fact. Look at this fact. The fact is this. This is a fact.
And they spend a lot more time on it, and they do sort of repeat things a lot, right?
And then that stops. That makes you learn it slower.
It does slow you down a little bit.
But if you do
there's a lot more involved. Like the pacing, like you said, moving at your own pace and stuff like that are bigger factors. But this is optimization, right? This is making things as good as they can be. Okay, so that's an important piece. And so space repetition, memorize. I'll try and put some links down in the description. Anki is sort of the gold standard. They're the ones that kind of started popularizing it and putting apps out to support people doing it. I learned a lot of my Japanese using Anki when I first started off.
Which one is Anki?
You haven't used it. Yeah, it's an older app. Yeah.
It sounds familiar. It sounds like I used to do a Spanish.
I'll show it to you. You may know some stuff.
Does it have like a face with a smiley on it?
No.
Okay, I remember doing a Spanish one.
Oh, I remember that one. Yeah, I don't remember what that one was. But that's one of the good things about Memrise, because like on the other apps, a lot of the other apps, it'll show you a flashcard, and then you see what the answer was, and then you score yourself on how well you remembered it.
You could totally cheat.
Was it easy? Was it hard? Did you barely remember it? Did you have to look it up? Did you not know it? And so
it was cheating. You could totally cheat.
You
could just be like, I did it good.
But then you're just screwing yourself out of like how much you're going to learn, right? So why would you cheat at something like that? So, but Memrise, it really tests you. Like with the Japanese that we're doing, like when you have to go in and spell it in kana, right? Or you have to, it does it English to Japanese and Japanese to English, so it tests you a lot of different ways, and I really love that it does that, right? So yeah, Memrise is my favorite app right now. And the other thing, they have huge repositories. People have built all of these flashcard sets for, you know, there's like the JLPT, the Japanese Language Proficiency Test. There's several levels of that test, and that's kind of the gold standard for showing how well you know Japanese as a non-Japanese person, right? And so if you can put on your resume, I've got, you know, JLPT level 2, then that's a good thing. And so people take the vocabulary.
How many levels are there in JLPT?
There's like 3 or 4 levels. Yeah, it's really 4, 3, and 2 are the ones that people care about most. So people build the vocabulary from those test sets and build cards, and you just download that set and use it. You don't have to build everything that you're going to do. Like we're going to build the custom ones for Hank Green's physiology course.
Yay.
But I use a lot of things that I just grab, and there's just hundreds and hundreds and thousands of decks out there, and you can just grab the one you want.
Flashcards app, I made the derpiest set ever, because it's just like, mom is mom, dad is dad, potato is It was wonderful.
Right. And did that help you learn something?
Yeah, it helped me learn that potato is
You haven't forgotten it. You still remember it. So the other thing that I want to talk about really quickly is this thing that's called the illusion of competency is really what it is. And people talk a lot about testing and how there's too much testing going on, and that testing has gotten a bad name, right? And testing, if we call it assessment instead of testing, that makes it a little bit better, right?
Assessment
That's like a
fancy.
quiz, like a test is thought of differently. A high stakes exam is thought of differently than a quiz, or like a pop quiz kind of thing.
Quiz.
There's low assessment. Low stakes assessments is kind of what I'm talking about here, which means like you're not getting graded on it, but you're getting tested. Yes. Using flashcards is a no stakes assessment because you're testing yourself. Right? There's this thing, like the illusion of competency, that is if you're reading something and you're just looking at the vocabulary, like if I just had a sheet that had English words, Japanese words, and you just read that all the time and studied that way, and you did it, let's see, you even did space repetition, then this phenomenon would happen where you would look at Genki and it would say well, and you would think, I know that, I knew that was well, I got that one, it's no problem, right? But then you get put in a situation where somebody says, how do you say well in Japanese, and suddenly you don't remember it. Like when you were looking at the answer, you really thought you knew it. Yeah. You had this illusion of competency.
Because you just saw it.
You just saw it, right? But you just thought, oh, I knew that. I totally knew that, right? And if you're not doing the flashcard system and testing yourself to see what you know and identifying your weak spots and helping set that repetition or that space in the space repetition process, then you're going to do it poorly because you're a really poor judge of what you know and what you don't know. Like everybody is really
like with
bad.
These flashcards, I actually they've helped me a lot.
Yeah.
My friend is. She says she's not very good at coming up with a name, so she constantly asks me, what is this in Japanese, so I can name it. I'm not bothered, by the way. I'm not complaining about it. So she asked me what milk was. And I did this forever ago in flashcards, and I remembered it. Milk is gyunyu.
That's right.
And although I didn't know what Paul was, so I admit I had to use Google Translate to find out what Paul is, and I'm like...
Well, what is?
Paul.
Paul? Like the name Paul?
No, Paul. Paul. Like a wolf. Paul.
Oh, Paul.
Yeah. I'm like, wait, what's that? And I looked it up and I'm like, wait, that's ashi? That's foot?
Yeah, it's ashi.
How could I have not known that?
They're all ashi. Well, you just, because it's a different word in English, so you expect it to be a different word in Japanese, but it's not always, right? Yeah, so like combining those two things, like this is just for our first video, and we'll talk about, there's so many other things. And I'll throw out, there's a couple of books that have done a really good job of summarizing some of the current research in learning. There's one called How We Learn, and there's one called Making It Stick. And they cover a lot of the same territory, and they talk about, they make it really digestible to read, to talk about some of the research that's going on in the space, and they talk about some of the same research, so they kind of reinforce each other. But they also link back to the research if you want to read into the detailed research. So reading those two books actually gives you a really good overview of some of the current thinking in cognitive science. But these concepts of spaced repetition and using assessment as a test, because when you assess yourself, what you're forcing yourself to do is remember, right? If you're looking at, here's good, here's inky, or inky, here's well, here's ginky. You're not having to remember that because you're looking at it. Yes. But if you test yourself, you're forcing yourself to remember it. And every time you remember it, you get better at remembering it. You're building those pathways in your brain. So the more you can remember, so you forget a little bit and then remember. And you have to wait longer next time because you've learned it a little bit. So you wait longer until you're just about to forget it, and then you have to remember it again. Yeah. And that's the optimal way to remember these kinds of things, right? And thank God these apps exist now, and we live in a world that has like these huge horsepower phones that run these relatively complex algorithms to determine. Like, seriously. Yeah. When should it show me something?
This right here is about, like, I don't know, more than 2 times the computer power it took to fly to the moon.
Thousands of times.
Thousands of times.
Way more than 2 times. Yeah, thousands of times.
Like thousands of times.
Yeah. I mean, they basically flew to the moon with a calculator, but that's another vlog.
Flew to the moon with a calculator.
That's another vlog.
Okay, you should do a dinosaur calculator.
Yeah, so that's, like I said, that's some of the basics, right? And that's why we do the apps. That's why we're actually, when we finish this, we're going to go upstairs and do some of your Japanese flashcards on the app. But now you know better, like why, and then why you wait, why we're not just constantly doing it over and over. We do the same thing with the math, right? I don't have you do the math problems every night. I pull them out every once in a while, and you have to think, how did I do this? How do you solve this problem? What do you do with your multiplying exponents?
I forgot algebra, and then I got really embarrassed because I haven't done it in like 3 months.
Yeah, so we waited too long, right? We learned that we waited too long, and we have to shorten that space a little bit, but you don't stretch it all the way out. Yeah, no, it's awesome. Yeah, so I think we'll just do this series a little bit. We'll talk about different, findings in the research, because I happen to work in education, right, and do some research in the education space, and so. I keep up with kind of what's going on out there, and I apply it to what you're doing, and you seem to be doing pretty well. So I think we'll share some of this information. This will be sort of a regular series for us. And like Presley said, if you guys have any questions at all, like something about homeschooling or about any of this stuff, throw it in the comments, and we'll try and answer it.
Put it in the comments of this video. Put it in the comments.
We'll do like a homeschool Q&A, like you said. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Homeschool Q&A, like. If we need to do another normal Q&A, by the way.
We do. We'll do a video and ask for questions later.
Yes, we'll do it. So if you have any questions, please post them in the comments below. If it's anything about homeschool or learning something by yourself, like you don't have to be in like school age. Yeah. Like if you want to learn something.
Yeah, I use it.
Yes. Yeah, please post it in the comments below, and we'll answer your questions about homeschooling or whatever you want to know about learning itself.
Cool. Awesome.
So yeah, thank you for watching. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye!
Bye, guys.
Do you have the microphone on?
Hope so.